Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have two very special guests who just published a book. They come to us all the way from Scotland. And if you're watching this on Rumble, Rockfin, or X, you will see them and their new book cover. The full title of the book is Two World Wars and Hitler, Who Was Responsible? Anglo-American Money, Foreign Agents, and Geopolitics. And the authors are Jim MacGregor and John O'Dowd. And they're here to share this book. I was reading through it, some familiar names. Maybe if you listen to my show, Carol Quigley, the Anglo-American Establishment. I've done recent shows on the Pilgrim Society. It's like overlapping interests in this Anglo-American establishment or the Atlanticists and this book. And we were talking in the pre-show how timely this book is because some of the same characters and things are still happening. But these two gentlemen can talk more about that. So Dr. John O'Dowd and Jim MacGregor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on. I think there's so much we could talk about in this First World War, the genesis of the First World War, and the run up to Hitler and the Second World War. I've been on this, researching this for about 25 years now more. I actually did a couple of books earlier, Hidden History, The Secret Origins of the First World War, and followed that up a few years later by Prolonging the War, how these elites who ran Britain and America at the time deliberately prolonged the war after 1915 when it could and should have ended. And we outline the reasons for that. We talk about, much of our work is based on research we did with this fella here, Carol Quigley. You've mentioned him before in your shows, and he told us in this book that a secret society was set up in London in 1891 by some really powerful rich men in London, Lord Rothschild, Cecil Rhodes, the diamond magnate who worked in South Africa and made a huge fortune there. Rich and powerful people, and what these guys wanted to do was use the money that they had to expand the British Empire throughout the world. They wanted to bring in the United States into this, elites in the United States, East Coast establishment, and promote the values, English-speaking values across the world. It's all very dark and stuff, as Quigley explained. They wanted to control the world. They actually controlled, through their money, they controlled politicians. They did that through central banks. John will probably mention that, discuss that later. But they controlled politicians, they controlled the press, and they controlled education, the writing and teaching of history. They did that through Oxford University mainly, and through the control of education, they were able to control the writing and teaching of the history of their own time, and through that control, they were able to whitewash the secret society, was able to whitewash its existence from the historical record. But there's a lot of information. Quigley's book is absolutely jam-packed with details and information. He said he was a very eminent. He was no conspiracy theorist. This guy. He was a very eminent American academic historian, trained at Harvard, qualified at Harvard, top student in his year every year. He was summa cum laude graduate. He had numerous postgraduate degrees. And he taught at Harvard for history at Harvard for a short time. Then he was headhunted to the School of Foreign Services at Georgetown University, and he was there for something like 35 years. During that time, he was a member of all sorts of leading societies in the United States. The guy basically was at the top of the pinnacle of his career, and he tells us that he could back up everything he said in this book with evidence. And he tells us that he got a lot of his information from a friend who was a historian at Oxford University, a guy called Alfred Zimmerman, And this guy, Zimmerman, he was professor of history at Oxford University. He was in all sorts of British committees, senior committees, and he spilled the beans to Quigley about this secret society. And the reason he knew about this secret society was that he'd actually been a member of it. He'd been a member of it for about 10 years. He saw the direction it was taking, going to spin out wars, cause wars to happen, bring about wars and strife across the world. They'd already done that in South Africa in the Boer War to grab the Boer's gold. But so this guy Zimmerman packed in the secret society, walked away in disgust, and told Quigley all about it. Quigley wrote this book in 1947-48, but it was so explosive that he wouldn't allow it to be published in his lifetime. He died in 1977, I think it was, and it was only a few years later that the book was published. He'd also published a book, Tragedy and Hope, which talks about this guy. So that our work's based to a considerable extent on Carroll Quigley and his expose of this secret society, and we decided to dig in and see what the members of this secret society, what role they had, if any, in the First World War, and we did that, and we found overwhelming evidence that they were deeply involved in deliberately bringing a war about with Germany. These guys wanted to control the world, an Anglo-American establishment that would control the world. They formed their special alliance at that time, King Edward VII and President Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, and they wanted to, as I said earlier, spread the word spread their control all over the world through their control of the central banks in many different countries. And one of the main stumbling blocks to that potential control for them was Germany. Germany was a young country. It was blossoming in every way. It was booming industrially, commercially, opening colleges, teaching youngsters all sorts of sciences and technical stuff. And they knew they would have to take Germany out if they were ever going to achieve the global control that they wanted. And from about 1902, 1903, they actually started planning the war with Germany. It took a good decade to get the whole thing planned and thought out.
Now, here's the thing: is that Germany got blamed for it at Versailles. They were the ones blamed. So that is this history, this kind of like structured history, is that they're to blame for World War I, which led to World War II. But yeah, they're plotting, and you write in your book, these are people who know each other, like they know Kaiser Wilhelm and Edward VII and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. You're right. They blamed Germany. The war. There was a ceasefire, an armistice in November. It'd been on for about four and a half years. This time up until November 1918, and they had an armistice, and then they held peace talks at Paris over the next 6 months. The German delegates, there were no German delegates allowed at Paris. They weren't allowed to have any legal representation, nothing. The men who'd caused the war, the Anglo-Americans who'd caused the war, stitched Germany up totally. Germany signed Article 312, accepting guilt for the war, but they did so at the point of a metaphorical gun, really. They had German during that six month period between the end of the armistice and this talks at Versailles in June 1919. The British had continued a naval blockade of Germany, completely unnecessary. All the German troops had handed in their weapons, laid down their weapons, and trudged back home to their families. And what they found was absolutely horrendous. The German people were starving at the time. But the British decided carry on this food blockade, and they did so. And it's reckoned that about 1 million women and children were starved to death in Germany over that time. And they told German representatives eventually, if you don't accept guilt for this war, we're going to continue this blockade indefinitely. We're going to starve Germany till there's nobody left, basically. That was the threat. And we'll break Germany up into small principalities like it used to be prior to the 1870 unification of Germany. And Germany would basically be no more. So the German delegates signed, yeah, we accept the guilt. They had to. They were forced to. But the story about the First World War is quite fascinating in itself. But it's a huge topic. I mean, we could be sitting here for days discussing that. So what I thought I would do is probably, it's one of the things have found most interesting doing this research over the years is the role of the British and American intelligence services in the lead up in the years between the end of the interwar years, between the end of the first and the beginning of the second. 1920.
There's a lot there. Dulles. There's so many characters. I think Dulles, John Foster Dulles, was involved in Versailles. So you had like intel and very high level operators in those interwar periods. And if people remember, there were massive reparations that were imposed upon the German people too. So it wasn't just like food blockades. There was land taken away, right? Wasn't it the Alsace or something close to the Rhine? And then massive reparations. And to get out of those reparations, the German government inflated the currency, and then everybody's savings was gone in Germany. So just huge. I mean, the war might have been over, but these were huge effects. And Hitler was always railing and calling all the people who signed the Versailles Treaty criminals all the way up until he got
fired. Yeah, they caused absolute mayhem in Germany after the war. You say the raging hyperinflation, and they took it. Part of the Versailles Treaty was that Germany would hand over half of its railway trucks, half of its railway engines, its fishing fleet, all the fishing tackle. They had no means of producing food for themselves. So Germany was right on the verge of becoming basically a third world backwater. And it's interesting that there's a fantastic writer, Professor Guido Preparata. Perhaps you know his work. He wrote an incredible book called Conjuring Hitler, and he said that his thesis, Preparatus, he was a professor of history at Boston University, and he wrote this thesis that they deliberately drove Germany to the brink, so that reactionary forces would arise from this, and they wanted somebody like Hitler to come to the fore. And when they found this man, this ex, in the 1920s, he was still in the German army. Hitler had served. He was a vagabond and roamed about Vienna for years. He joined the German army and served. He was in the lowest ranks right through the war. He was quite brave, actually. He served as a messenger, frontline messenger, running between the front lines and General HQ. And
it was sorry to interrupt, but it was kind of a mystery. He spent 4 years in the army. It was a mystery that he never rose to a higher rank than I think the German equivalent of a corporal or something. Because
that's right, a lance corporal. But his superior officer said he just didn't have command qualities. He was never going to make it. Which seems strange now in retrospect when you think about what happened. But so Guido Preparata says that they identified this man, and they decided that they were going to build this little guy up into power. He was the sort of man they were looking for. He hated Russia. He hated communists, and he hated Jews, and he was going to sort Russia out. He was determined he was going to take Germany, build Germany up again, and have another go at Russia. And this is exactly what these elites wanted. They wanted Germany and Russia tearing each other's throats out, so they wouldn't be an obstacle to their progress and for globalist power. So we know this is where we come in to talk about some of the intelligence services. About 15 years ago, there was a Cambridge historian, Dr. Peter Martland. He'd done a lot of research in the British archives, and he found material that proved conclusively that the British Secret Service was funding Mussolini in Italy.
That's right. I remember
Benito Mussolini. He became the fascist dictator of Italy and fought with Germany alongside Hitler in the Second World War. So this guy was getting promoted by British intelligence. They were paying him, excuse me, at the time, £100 per week. Now, at that time, the ordinary working man across Europe was earning about £4 per week. When you work it out, today's figures and the conversions into dollars, I think it's about $8,000 or $9,000 a week this guy was getting. Incredible.
Incredible, yeah.
So, and this Professor Martin Thiel, he found a material that this intelligence in Germany and Italy was being run by a Conservative MP, a member of Parliament, Peter Samuel Hoare. And oh, excuse me, I'm going to start coughing again. Sorry. And he describes having 100 agents, intelligence agents, in Italy in the post-war period, the end of the First World War, the immediate post-war. So you've got to ask yourself, well, if British intelligence have got 100 agents in Italy, how many have they got in Germany? Italy's really of secondary importance to them. Germany's the big one that they're after. So how many? So we did quite a lot of research into that, and we found a number of British agents. Good solid evidence about they had. We can name at least 4 or 5 British agents, and one very powerful American agent who was there. Two of these guys. One of the British agents, Baron William de Ropp. He was at Hitler's side for 15 years, and the American agent, Putzi Hanstel, Ernst Sedgwick Hanstel. He was a Harvard graduate. I'll come to him shortly. These 2 guys were directly at Hitler's side. The British intelligence and American intelligence managed to insinuate these 2 guys directly alongside Hitler, and they stayed there for almost the whole of the 1920s and 30s. They as Guido Preparata said, they were grooming Hitler for power. They were bringing this man Hitler up. They were building up this nobody, and building him up so that Germany would take Germany into another disastrous war. They weren't supporting Hitler or building him up because they thought he was good for Germany or would be good for the peace of Germany or the peace of Europe. They knew this guy was bonkers. Really, he was an oddball, and
loner. Like he was like a vagabond, like you said. Like he slept in the train carriage before the war. He used to ask people for their luggage to help them with their luggage and try to get tips. Like that was his job. Yeah, he never had a job. Like they hid his whole background too. Like people now they know about his background and that he was in an insane asylum, like a literal sanitarium. But like back then, a lot of that stuff was not. The Germans didn't know all of it.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating that they chose this guy. They chose him basically because of his political outlook. But Hitler himself only discovered that he had a golden voice. He could speak. He could communicate. He could speak off the cuff and address crowds and get crowds interested in what he was saying. And that was a leadership quality the elites, the Anglo-American elites saw in him and attracted them to him. So going back to the agents, one of them was one of the leading British agents was de Ropp, Baron William de Ropp. He came from, his father owned quite a lot of land. He had a landed estate in Lithuania and the Balkans, in the Baltic, and he went to school in Germany. He was educated in Dresden, but when he was about 20, he came to Britain, and he did a degree in engineering at Birmingham University, took British citizenship, and joined the British forces for the First World War. He fought in the Royal Flying Corps, which was the precursor of the Royal Air Force, and he was there for 4 years. And when after the war, he was inducted into the British Intelligence Service. He was married to a woman called Ruth Fisher, who obviously came from a rich and quite powerful family, and she had very influential people that introduced this guy into the British intelligence. So he was sent off to Germany as a British agent in the early 1920s. Difficult to find out exactly when, whether it was 22 or 1923. And he posed as an engineer for the Bristol Aircraft Company in England, and he also posed part-time. He was supposedly acting as a reporter, a journalist for the Times, the leading newspaper in London, the London Times. And he met up with some guys he knew in Germany, and he was introduced to this little oddball Hitler in the early stages before Hitler. And anyone really knew about Hitler. He was just a minor political agitator on the streets of Munich. And he befriended Hitler. Hitler thought he was a good guy. He thought this guy was really interested in Germany. He sympathised with Germany. He'd been educated in Germany, and they became very friendly. And he was at Hitler's side for a long number of years. And that takes us on to another British agent in the early 1930s. There was a chap called Frederick Winterbottom. He was a pilot, a fighter pilot, if you could call it a fighter in the First World War. You know, the double wings and the open cockpits. He was shot down. He came from quite a wealthy family. He was shot down over the German lines in 1917. This guy Winterbottom, and he became de Ropp's handler. Winterbottom became when he came out the fort. In 1917, when he was shot down, he spent about a year and a half in a German prisoner of war camp, and he was treated very kindly by the German guards, and he learned to speak German quite well. But when war ended, he was released, came back to England, did a degree in law at Oxford University, and when he completed that, he messed about with farming for a year or two, but then eventually he went and joined the British Intelligence Service, and he was made up to a group captain, and he was put in charge of the British Air Intelligence sector for Britain, and he was now the overall boss of de Ropp and other British agents. So he called de Ropp back to London for a briefing about it, and he told de Ropp these two guys knew each other because both had been in the Flying Corps, you see, and they'd come across each other's paths, so they knew each other and trusted each other. So Winterbottom sent de Ropp back to Germany and said, "Look, I want you to impress on Hitler that I am a very loyal, considerate friend of Germany. I love Germany, and I think he's doing a grand job for Germany, and I would really like to come over and meet him." And of course, when de Ropp went back and told Hitler this, "Yeah, of course, bring him over. It'd be lovely to see him." You know, and so this guy who's now head of British Air Intelligence, very high in the intelligence service, he's now in that Hitler is one of his friends, and Hitler, he tells him that he's in charge of setting up and creating a new air force in Britain, and how is it going with the Luftwaffe? And Hitler tells him, gives him all the details, and he sends him round in staff cars with senior officers to visit airfields and production factories for the Luftwaffe. And so this guy gets all this information, and it's all fed back to Winterbottom. And Winterbottom tells de Ropp, I want you to bring one of the leading Nazis over to Britain. I want to speak to him. And they brought Alfred Rosenberg, who was one of the leading Nazis and a German, one of the theorists of the Nazi parties. He was deeply involved in encouraging the anti-Semitism and stuff like that. So de Ropp brings Rosenberg over with Hitler's blessing to London, and Winterbottom meets him and treats him like royalty and shows him around and takes him to the RAF club in Piccadilly, the plush officers club, and gives him a great time. Introduces him to Geoffrey Dawson, the editor of the Times, a very influential man in Britain, and some other high people in the British establishment. And of course, Rosenberg is back to Germany singing the praises of this guy. This guy Winterbottom's marvelous. And Hitler says, get him over to return the compliment and show him some German hospitality. Winterbottom is over. He's back and forward all the time between Germany and Britain. And his guise as an RAF officer, but actually working for British intelligence. So he goes to Germany. I think it's 1934, and he's taken round all the Luftwaffe fields, and factories, and he's told all the information about how the Luftwaffe is coming on, how many bombers they've got, how many fighters, and and at one point Rosenberg takes him and de Ropp for dinner one night in the famous Hochscher's restaurant in Berlin, very well-known restaurant at the time, and there to have dinner with him are two leading air commodores from the Luftwaffe and a leading British general, a leading army general for the German army, Walter von Reichenau, I think his name is in. And they're sitting talking. They're all having good time, nice meal, lots of nice wine, and Winterbottom just asks outright, "What is your plan for the Soviets? What are you going to do here? Because Britain really aims to help you, and Britain's going to come in and support you and all this stuff. They're telling them lies, they're feeding them all this so that they will attack Russia, and then when they do attack Russia, they'll trap them in the cage, and then Britain will come into the war." So this guy Reichenau, he is the guy who has set out all the major plans for the German invasion of Russia whenever the war gets started. It's called Operation Barbarossa. He tells him everything in detail for hours. He's telling him all this stuff, and it all comes to pass.
Yeah, it was June 22nd, 1941, I think. Barbarossa takes off. Yeah.
Well, Britain knew about it from 1934. They knew it in fine detail from the man who'd planned it, and they obviously, I'm saying obviously, I don't know whether they did or not, to be honest, but you would think as Russia's ally, they would have told Russia.
That's another battle. I mean, they don't like Russia or Germany, just like you said.
Yeah, but Barbarossa became one of the biggest battles in the history of mankind. When the Germans spent 6 months trying to reach Moscow, and
they were on in the suburbs of Moscow. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, Stalingrad. Horrendous. Millions and men on both sides were slaughtered in that battle. And the British knew for years it was coming, and presumably so too did the Russians. When they started Barbarossa, tanks and thousands of airplanes and tanks and all the logistical support moved in, and the Russians moved back, kept moving back. It was almost as if they deliberately sucked them into the Russian interior, got them closer and closer, and they keep them thinking they're going to succeed, and then eventually they just closed the net on them and smashed them. And Germany was defeated at that battle. Yeah. So that was. I made some notes. That was this guy de Ropp. When the war ended, he retired and led the next 30 years in a lovely retirement, playing golf, and he died in his bed peacefully in his 90s. But the guy, Frederick Winterbottom, this is it okay to keep talking about, or would you rather?
Yeah, I'm all yours.
The Winterbottom, the chap, the Air Commodore who was in charge, he got all this information, as I've said. He been feeding it back in about. They knew everything about the Luftwaffe, where the planes were, how many planes were at different airfields across Germany in fine detail. They had the whole lot all stitched up and knew, and he was feeding this.
And the battle for Britain is what preceded the invasion of Russia, right? So this is like a huge air. It was a huge air battle. That's all it was.
Yeah.
A land battle.
Yeah. The implications of all this stuff are. We've only scratched the surface with this, to be honest. It needs a lot of deep research into stuff.
But there's all kinds of other connections to Germany from Britain. It's JFC Fuller. He's talking to other generals. That's one guy. Crowley's there. Ian Fleming is around. It was in the interwar years. There's all kinds of characters. Like they had their eye on Germany. There's no question about it.
I'll come to Crowley because I think I've pretty much covered the outline of Winterbottom. He at the end of the war he retired. When Germany entered the war, he went to GCHQ. The Secret Intelligence Sector in Bletchley Park in England, where they had all the German codes and
was it Ultra or the Enigma stuff?
Codes and stuff like that. There's been quite a few films written about that. But he retired, and he enjoyed a nice, comfortable retirement until he died in old age. And I'm going to come to Alistair Crowley now. I know you've written books now, but in fact, I've got one of your books sitting here. I'll get you to sign it.
There it is, Children of the Beast. That's it.
It's
my own cover design, guys. That's my artistry at work.
So I'm going to come to now. I'd mentioned earlier that the American Secret Service had a very important player alongside Hitler through the 1920s and 30s. This guy, his name was Hans Stegel, and he came from a very wealthy German family, Munich. In back generations, his family had developed photography. They were photographic pioneers and lithographic pioneers in Germany and Europe, and they made vast sums of money, and they were close to royalty, German royalty and British royalty. Mark Twain, lots of people like that were visiting their house, and all sorts of famous people. So this guy who became the agent, his name was Ernst Sedgwick Anstegel. He was called Pootsie, and that name arose. It's a term of endearment for a little child, a little fellow in Germany, a Bavarian, and
because he was big, right? He wasn't that kind of the
6'4". He grew into a 6 foot hulk of a man.
Yeah, and that's him on the cover right there.
That's him on the cover. Yeah, he's sitting talking to, hypnotizing Hitler, and he got this name because when he was 2, he was very seriously ill with diphtheria, and the family thought the family doctor told him, look, there's very little hope. It's 48 hours now. He's getting worse rather than better. There's nothing more I can do. And one of the old ladies, an old servant from the family, sat and nursed him, and she kept giving him water, and she kept saying, "Come on, Pootsie, this term of endearment," and that name stuck. He survived thanks to her, and the name stuck. And he as a child, he was taught music, piano, violin, and singing by top European musical instructors and tutors. He went to an elite school in Munich, and when he was 17 or 18, he was going to Harvard. Now, that's where we've got to bring in his mother, because his mother was American, and she came from a very, very rich and powerful Boston Brahmin family, whose roots went back to the Puritans 300 and 400 years earlier. One of Pootsie's ancestors was General Robert Sedgwick, and he had been a close friend of Oliver Cromwell in England, and he came over to America, the New World, in New England, and he was a military man, and he was made the captain of Boston. He was the man that set up all the fortresses and defences around Boston, and he fought off the French, and he fought off the Dutch and various other things, and he was eventually made the Governor General of Jamaica by Cromwell. But he actually was one of the founding fathers of Harvard University. He set it up as a college for Puritan ministers, but it morphed and became Harvard University. So Pootsie's going to this university with one of his ancestors was a founding father of. And not only that was not the only connection. His mother's cousin, or second cousin, was the long-term president of Harvard University, Charles William Eliot. And people had told Pootsie before he went there, "Oh, you mustn't approach the president on campus. He doesn't like speaking to undergraduates. He's very aloof. So you mustn't approach him or speak to him." And Pootsie said, "Well, I've actually been invited for dinner at their house because he's a relative as soon as I arrive." So they took Pootsie. President Eliot and his wife took their young nephew, relative, under their wing while the 4 years he was at Harvard, and they were having house parties, and the guests they were having it was like a list of America's who's who. There was J.P. Morgan and Roosevelt. All the people who were funding research and stuff, eugenics and what have you at Harvard. So Pootsie mixed with these people, and he also one of his fellow students was Theodore Roosevelt, the president's son, Theodore Jr. And he said, "Come along and meet my dad." So they took him along. They went to the White House, and Pootsie had a great time. And when Roosevelt heard that he played piano and he was a good musician, he says, "Come and play the grand piano in the White House." And he played some beautiful classical music. And from then on, the president invited Pootsie back to the White House whenever he had important guests to play music for them. He would go to their summer house at Oyster Bay for holidays with them. So he was right in there at the heart of the American establishment. Now he was setting up his whole career for America. The Hanstegel family had opened galleries, prestigious fine art galleries in London and Paris, and they'd opened one in Fifth Avenue in New York. And Pootsie, the whole point of Pootsie getting this art degree was he was going to run the art gallery in New York. So when he finishes. Well, there's one other important thing I should bring in. While he's at Harvard, he joins some of the clubs. He's told the whole point of Harvard is making connections with people, meeting people, building up links. It's not really about getting an academic degree, it's about making connections. So he joins this club called the Hasty Puddings Club. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I have. Yeah.
Hasty Puddings. It's an amateur dramatic and sort of singing club, and they put on shows twice a year. And Pootsie joins us, and in the first year, he's obviously getting talks with some of the senior students how to act and how to. But he's very welcome in this club because he's a fantastic musician and a singer. But by the time he's in final year, he's now directing shows in Hasty Puddings, and he's telling the young students how to project their voice, how to animate themselves, make body movements to influence what. And he was also captain of the Harvard football team, and he used to whip the crowds out. He was fantastic at whipping the crowds up into a frenzy. But that comes in later when he goes to Germany and he teaches Hitler all of this. But when Putzi finishes Harvard, he goes back to Germany, does a year with the Life Guards Regiment, and comes back to run the gallery on Fifth Avenue. And he has lunch every day in the Harvard Club, which is just off Fifth Avenue. I can't remember it. It's a very close, very plush club. And he meets
super elite, Eastern elite, just like the Anglo-American establishment.
You've probably eaten in there quite a few times, William.
I wish. I'm all the way in California. We're not part of New England. But it is interesting. This guy's networked with all these very important Eastern establishment types. When you say he's hypnotizing Hitler in his ear, is he literally hypnotizing, or are you just?
Well, I think probably there was. I used to do medical hypnosis. I was a medical doctor. And I don't know. I was just speculating. But So just to finish off with Putzi, he's now back in New York running the gallery, and he's having lunch every day with top people. He becomes very close with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, and he's in the gallery. People are coming in to chat to him in the gallery, where he's playing some nice music while they look at the gallery. And J.P. Morgan, the banker in Wall Street, he's one of them, and Morgan's the woman who runs Morgan's library and museum, Belle Green, a very young, attractive woman, and Putzi has an affair with her. And there's all sorts of famous people. This guy has now built up a huge knowledge of all the top people.
And Crowley had an affair with her as well.
Oh wow, same woman, huh?
Yeah.
So one of the guys who comes into the gallery happens to be the man you know well, Arthur Crowley, and there's other. So he's working for British intelligence at this time. Crowley, he's sent over on the Lusitania, in fact, and he's mixing with all sorts of people, and there's guys called Quinn and John Reed. In the book we outline how in New York at this time, around the time of the First World War, Putzi Hamstegel was mixing with people who are all part of the Anglo-American intelligence service. These two services, they might seem quite distinct, but they're actually working in very close unison. They're almost intertwined, and so Putzi's inducted into the American Secret Intelligence Service, and a lot of Germans were interned during the First World War. German Americans, I think the whole Boston. If I read somewhere, the whole Boston Symphony Orchestra, all the Germans in it were put in jail. But Putzi, for some reason, escapes all this. He doesn't get put in jail. In the 1920, he continues running his gallery. And in 1920, he marries an American girl, and they have a son. And in 1921, he now begins his work for the intelligence service, and he's sent to Munich. And for a year after they arrive there, he's a sleeper agent in Munich. And then in late 1922 comes the call from the American embassy in Berlin. We want you to go and meet this guy, Hitler. And just like the rock before him, he goes along and he chats to Hitler in the beer hall. Interestingly, the man in the American embassy who sends him along to meet Hitler is an old friend from Harvard, the best buddies.
Wow.
And so Putzi goes along and listens to this guy, and the next time Hitler's speaking at the beer hall meeting, Putzi takes his wife along, and Putzi takes her up and introduces them, and he's quite smitten. She's apparently a very attractive American blonde woman. He's never really met an American woman, and he's infatuated with her. And she invites him back for coffee and a meal. Hitler goes back, and the rest is history. Putzi's at Hitler's side for the next 15 years. Right at his side, he teaches him all the movements. We've actually got pictures in the book where Hitler's getting taught all the arm movements, and Putzi teaches him the German Sieg Heil chant. That's all adapted from Harvard football chants. So Putzi's with in 1923. Putzi's with Hitler when the attempt to the Munich putsch, the beer hall putsch in 1923. They go along to a big meeting, and a predetermined time, all the Nazi troops arrive outside, burst in the door with machine guns, and Hitler fires his gun in the air. I'm taking over. We're taking over Germany, and the army is with us. The army wasn't with them, as it turned out. He was telling a lie. But the next morning, they march into the centre of Munich, and the German army and police are waiting and fire. And there's a big gun battle. Quite a number of Nazis are killed and police. Hitler's pulled to the ground by one of his bodyguards, and he gets a dislocated shoulder. And he goes to Putzi's house down in the south of Munich, and Putzi's wife looks after him, tries to sort his shoulder and comforts him. She puts him up in a bedroom in the attic, but the German police find out and come and arrest him. Hitler ends up in jail. He gets for sedition. He gets charged. He gets sentenced to 5 years in jail. He only serves 1 year, and when he gets out, the first place he goes at Christmas 1925 is to Putzi's house for Christmas dinner.
Wow.
But very hugely close.
That's where he's writing Mein Kampf, is in Ingolstadt prison, right?
Sorry, I missed that.
I think that's where Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, is at Ingolstadt prison where he was interred.
Yes.
He wrote Mein Kampf, yeah. And in fact, there's quite a lot of evidence that Putzi Hamstegel helped him with that. He edited it, and doubtless Putzi would have been getting orders from higher up his command chain. Tell Hitler to write this, tell Hitler to do that. That's speculation, but I would think it's probably likely. But moving on, Hitler decides to go. He enters what's called his quiet years, and he decides he's going to try and achieve power in Germany through the democratic process. And he's going to fight elections and stuff like that. And in the 1930s, when the Great Depression hits everywhere, Germany slumps back into a terrible state again, and Hitler knows his time's come. The people will be wanting a reactionary leader, and they build up. And then in the 1932 election, the Nazi bubble seems to have burst because the communists, the socialists are making inroads. And then 5 days before the next general election, the Reichstag, German parliament's burned down. The whole thing is up in flames. And Hitler blames the communists. They arrest a young patsy, a Dutch guy, take him and say, this is the guy, the communist who set the fire to the Reichstag. He gets beheaded.
Martin van der Lubbe or something.
That's the very man. He gets beheaded. He's beheaded for his trouble. But we've got a lot of information in the book that actually Putzi Hamstegel was in the Reichstag Palace that night and directing operations for the arson team.
Wow, that's incredible. Because that was the event. That was the beginning.
Absolutely.
That
Hitler seized power, dictatorial power, sent all the socialists and leftists into concentration camps, killed a lot of them, and took dictatorial power. And that, as Professor Anthony Sutton said, that was actually the start of the Second World War. That was the moment.
Right, that's an interesting point. It really was. That was it. I mean, it's like our Congress here in the United States burning down.
Yeah,
like, it's incredible.
Yeah, and there's solid evidence that this fella puts in the cover there with Hitler that he was heavily involved.
Wow, it's incredible. And there's like tunnels. There's the fires all start in different areas around the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, van der Lubbe had to have like ran and burned stuff. And then the fire is ferocious. You can see the video of it. It's not like a small fire, like the whole thing burnt to a crisp. Yeah.
The official history, the mainstream history, the fake history is that the leading Nazis were having a party at Hermann Göring's house in Berlin that night, and Putzi was feeling unwell. He had a temperature and he had a flu, and he wanted to go and lie down. And so he went and took a room in the Reichstag Palace and took some medicine to help him. And that's why he was in the palace that night. All BS, you know.
Right. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, that's the event. That's it.
So Putzi's flying about all over Germany when Hitler's campaigning and stuff like that. They both fly off in the private aeroplane. But then in 1935, 1937, I think Hitler's beginning to become a bit suspicious about this guy for some reason. I've never actually been able to dig out what it is, but Hitler's becoming suspicious. And he orders Hitler to go on a flight on a German plane to Spain, where the Franco's forces are fighting the Republicans in Spain. And the pilot recognises Putzi, and he obviously this is the official story about this. He tells Putzi said, I have to be dropped over the fascist lines, and the pilot says, no. My orders are you have to be dropped over the communist lines. He says it's a death sentence. And the pilot obviously feels sympathy. This is it's like a James Bond thriller at this point. The pilot says, "Oh, the aircraft's there's a fault with the engine. I'll need to land at this little airfield in southern Germany before we go." And Putzi makes a daring escape, and that he gets over the border to Switzerland in 1937, and he gets his son and he takes him to London, and then he spends a couple of years in London, and then he's interned for a little while as an alien in London, and then he's sent to Canada. And then in 1941, when the United States enters war at Pearl Harbor, his good friend Franklin Delano Roosevelt sends a plane to bring him to Washington, and he makes Putzi his White House advisor on the Nazis. And he gives him a big house near Washington, cook and a servant, and he puts a big Steinway grand piano on it for Putzi's entertainment. Wow. It's a story you could not make up. It's so
no, you couldn't. Like, and this is a guy who's like lost from history, like almost never gets talked about. Hitler's circle of evil or whatever. Like, it's got to be. I mean, it makes you think he's deliberately underplayed because they knew. Yeah.
This is exactly the situation that, as we see it. We go into some detail in the book to show why these kinds of things are obliterated from history. And it's about how the teaching of history, and therefore what the public knows, what's taught in schools, what journalists know, what politicians know, is deliberately distorted by the fact that the historiography process is dependent utterly on primary sources and documents. These documents never see the light of day. We've shown in the book, Jim's shown in his other books, how they are just disappeared. These documents are disappeared. In England, they go to a place called Stanhope Park, and they're behind, it's like Fort Knox, and you can't get near these documents. That's the ones that don't get thrown into the sea. And of course, this is where my interest comes in, because I've been interested for some time in how the academic profession has been used to promote the money power and has been taken over by the money power in our universities. So in the book, we describe how the teaching of history has been distorted by academic historians who have created a historiography that hides the truth rather than brings it out. And of course, this was something else that Quigley, whom we've mentioned earlier, recognised about economics, academic economics. Similarly, has done the same for understanding how the economy works, and particularly the nature of money and the nature of banking, which is not really taught properly or at all in reality in universities, and therefore economists get a very distorted idea about how money works. And of course, the whole process that Jim was talking about there, and the whole process about why these people were manipulating events, was because they wanted to have power over Eurasia, and that was in order to do that, they wanted Russia and Germany to go to war and mutually destroy each other, which is pretty much what happened. And Quigley, in his wonderful books, understands this. He understands this completely, as well as understanding how the history process has been distorted. Quigley talks about how economy and economic activity in the government are subverted by these people, because they understand that the problem resides in three areas: the ability to combine and control the wealth of others, the ability to direct and confiscate or devalue the wealth of others, and most importantly, the ability to create money out of thin air. And it's by being able to do that they control governments, politicians, and the rest. They offer all sorts of inducements to governments. In fact, this is what Quigley wrote. Bankers, especially international investment bankers, were able to dominate both business and government. They could dominate business because investment bankers had the ability to supply or refuse to supply capital. They took seats in the boards of directors of industrial firms, and as they had already done in commercial banks, savings banks, insurance firms, and finance companies, they funneled capital to enterprises which yielded control and away from those that resisted. And of course, most importantly, eventually they got their hands on the creation of money, government money, through owning and controlling the Federal Reserve. And then in the same year, 1913, they also instituted the income tax in America. And they never pay taxes. They either have tax-free endowments to the think tanks and the so-called charitable institutions, the foundations that they fund. And this means that they don't pay tax. And also they put their money offshore and they don't pay tax. So by creating money, they create credit and they create inescapable debt. And it's the creation of credit, it's the creation of money as debt with income from it. Because after all, if you think about it, if they're able to create unlimited amounts of money, why don't they just create it and keep it? But that's no use to them, because what they need to do is get that money out there and have people owing them money so that they then have the power over them, both the individuals and governments. And then they can play around with the economy. They can deflate it, inflate it. They can deprive them of money. They can foreclose on loans because they provide, if they starve the economy of money, people can't buy things, companies fail, and then they foreclose on the companies, and hey-ho, they're owning the companies. So this is the kind of thing that Quigley recognised, and he recognised how this power could be used, and particularly when that power was in the hands of the power to create and control money was in the hands of bankers rather than the state, which ultimately has the ultimate right of controlling money. This has been ceded to bankers, and the state is therefore the instrument of the bankers. And this is where all of this happened. And then finally, of course, he recognized that they do this on an international basis by controlling by setting up BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. You mentioned earlier the Versailles thing. This was instituted in order to control the payment of reparations to the victorious Allies in the First World War. But in fact, it was actually put under the control of these very same people, and it was used, in fact, to funnel money and resources, and ultimately control companies in Germany to build the Nazis and to build Hitler after the First World War. And that was the means by which they took control of the economy. The Young Plan and the Dawes Plan, how they took control of the economy of Germany, and how Germany, which had initially had a gold-based currency, eventually had a fiat currency, and the fiat currency was paper, and the gold ended up via London in Wall Street. And the other interesting thing from a war point of view of fiat currency is that whereas currency backed by gold is limited by the amount of gold available, fiat currency backed by nothing but the bonds of the bankers is unlimited, and they can therefore use that to create wars, in lengthen wars. They can have unlimited amount of times of war because they can print unlimited amounts of money and funnel it to both sides, which is precisely what they did.
It's incredible. Yeah. That's what happened after the war, too. They offshored a lot of money through Himmler and all these other characters out of the country and back. So it happened in World War I, too. Wow. It's amazing. I mean, there's a lot more in this book. There's so many different things. But, I mean, this Handstagel character, it's out of the history books. He's almost in the traditional history of Hitler. He gets a byword or a byline or something like that. If that. I mean, I just don't see him as important. Guys, we are at the hour mark. I mean, there's a lot in this book. Is there anything you'd like to add, or where can people find the book and find you? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah, the book's released by Trendy Publishing in Oregon, and it can be purchased through there for people who don't like the other outlets, the usual big outlets, Amazon and stuff like that, to sell the book.
So I can put a link to Trendy. It just got published on April 14th for people. April 14th, 2025. Today is the 21st. So
yeah, and Chris Milligan, who has been publishing at Trendy a lot of really interesting books. He published he's published books on Crowley by Richard Spence, a professor at Idaho.
He's Secret Agent 666. I've had Spence on my show, yeah.
So it can be bought through there. But Chris he was telling us he's done nearly 200 books over his publishing career, and he's particularly excited about this one. He thinks this is covering a lot of very important history that hasn't been covered or tied together, how the two wars are tied together. And a lot of people actually say that there wasn't a First World War and a Second World War. It was actually one 30-year war from 1914 to 1945.
And it's still going on.
Still going on. But Chris is setting up a round table kind of website type thing with Grand Theft World. Richard Grove, I don't know if you know Richard.
Yes, I've heard that name.
Yeah. They're going to set up and release some of the book on that, and have discussion panels about it from some of the world's leading experts, and they're going to discuss it. So that'll be quite an interesting venture for us. But no, that's fine. I just thank you for coming. Thank you for having us on your show.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing all the knowledge. And we had about 150 live listeners, so that's 130 on Twitter and some on Rumble. So thanks everybody for listening, and go get this book and see the real history. Like, I mean, I the sad truth is I was like a history major in college, and all those books are they're all like supported by the money power and the state, and they leave out very important things. Like, it's pretty incredible to think about it. But this is one of those things that puts the broader tapestry of understanding. And where's the best place if people have questions? So they can find you through the Trying Day website. But do you guys have email or social media if they want to follow up with you?
Yeah, I think you've got it. You could put it up on your site if you want.
Okay.
jim.macgregor.
I'll get that email. I'll put that email up there.
Yeah, you can put it up. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy for people to read the book and ask, and put questions forward or comments.
Sure. If they want to follow you or schedule maybe an interview. And how about you, John? Do you have social media or an email?
No, I really don't. I'm quite happy to be contacted through
Trying Day.
Trying Day, yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll put a link to their website. And again, the two guests are Jim MacGregor, and John O'Dowd, and their newly published book. Go get it, titled Two World Wars and Hitler, Who Was Responsible? Anglo-American Money, Foreign Agents, and Geopolitics. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, William.
Thank you very much indeed.
All right, stay there.